we have to complicate the matter. No, here I am there to raise certain questions which I will address. Maybe that I will ask you to think. So the independence that we got in 1947, we can always say that political independence. But what about that social, cultural, ethical, psychological, moral? No, these are some of the things that we need to talk about. And here there are already too many writers. I don't know. I'll speak for 30-40 minutes, maybe. That. To understand about the very idea. So I have two parts of my talk. The first part I will try to theorize, bringing the idea of what exactly is post-colonialism. And post-colonialism, whenever suppose that we go to any college for selection commission, I'm just that warning the future teachers, researchers, post-colonialism could be written in two ways, no? Post with hyphen and post without hyphen. And that you have to really bother to understand about what happens if there is no hyphen in between. So these are some of the things we will try to grasp today. I am primarily speaking to my students, maybe the student friends, not so much of teachers. So what I want to tell you is that in the process, the second part will try to bring certain texts because you have too many texts, including archivistic part, and then we have that play, also poetry and short story. So maybe that I will try to give maybe 2 or 3 textual evidences what I am speaking about, so that students are very clear about that what exactly is post-colonialism. Let me begin with the idea of that the term post-colonialism itself. And for that matter, that we have to go back to, there is a fascinating book. I'm sure that every library will have. I don't know about Aurobindo College library. This is called the post-colonial study because post-colonialism has become a study. And when we talk about theory, of course, I will tell my students that theory is already tested. No, just like science. When we talk about post-colonialism as a theory, that it has been already tested. And the truth about this term is not only being that experimented over years, but that it is also evolving over the years. So post-colonialism is a not dead end. It is a beginning to interrogate many of the subjects like history, culture, language, that region, nationalism, ethnicity, migration, that you can go on and on. It is not possible on my part to give you everything today, that. So it is a kind of, that not a complete end, but the beginning of reading either a civilization or a culture or a history or a language. So I quote, that Bill Ashcroft, as you know, is a great proponent of post-colonialism theory, and 3 of them, of course, Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffith, and Helen Tiffin, in their general introduction, and this will, of course, set the agenda, that for understanding the term of what exactly is post-colonialism. By the way, that when you read this book, they write post-colonialism with hyphen. But they also caution us by saying that hyphen always, that need not be, that used. And that's why they say, and I quote them just to, that give you a proper definition. The term post-colonialism is a resonant with all the ambiguity and complexity of the many different cultural experiences it implicates. It addresses all aspects of colonial process from the beginning of colonial contact. Post-colonialism critics and theorists should consider the full implication of restricting the meaning of the term after colonialism or after independence. All post-colonial societies to overt or subtle forms of neo-colonization dominance. So these are some of the things that we'll discuss, because that we have already told that post-colonialism is not an end, but it is a beginning to interrogate some of the cultural, linguistic, historical process. So, that the next thing that we need to do is the new colonization, because we are not yet independent. As I say, even though we are independent, meaning every nation, every country that you talk about, we always, they think that after independence, what? And that's why, that these writers they talk about is, it is fascinating when we try also to address the idea of neo-colonialism in the form of course, that cultural subjugation, and I will use this term, that after globalization, liberalization and privatization, there are two new terms, meaning I'm sure that you know about. One is McDonaldization, another is Coca-Colaization. No? So these are some of the new cultural expression in which we also need to talk about post-colonialism or neo-colonization in a big way. So these are some of the that early points that we need to develop about, whereby that there are also different perception of post-colonialism if you happen to be from certain caste, race, gender, linguistic community or religious group. Now these are some of the complexity that it will be difficult for us to understand. So what happens to say indigenous community? Say that when we talk about Africa, and mostly that because your course, meaning the text that we have in your course is one is Nigeria, of course, that Achilles King fall apart. Another is maybe that Gugi Wasingo. So what happens to the say racial the distinct community, because that they are not Asian, non-white. If there is any way to understand about their creative writing, so that in the meantime that what we need to do is, I have to remind you that when we talk about post-colonialism, the idea of colony is very important. Now let's try to enter into the discourse of colonization, which is also in another name imperialism. And when we talk about colonization, we basically talk about European colonization. Let me be very clear. And I don't know whether all of you know about, I'm sure you know about, but at one point of time, Europe went all over the world, not just Asia and Africa, but also America. America, of course, that was a colony, but that there are two America, I hope you know about, North America and South America. So North America was comparatively independent, whereas South America was completely under the British rule. And that's why that you also understand the idea of race and then slavery. No? The idea of slave as that another kind of constituency whereby the idea of imperialism, that try to not only pursue its power, but that it took several years, maybe that more than 200 years for the people to get their freedom out of slavery. India has a different kind of slavery. No? We know that India is unique, so we'll come back to India maybe later. But what I want to tell you is that, can I ask you one question, students? Maybe that if suppose America was one of the colonies, when did America get independence? Any idea? Anyone from the audience? Student friend, so that I know how much they know about. Anyone? When did America get independence? Any year you can indicate? If it was a colony. Any idea? Anyone? No idea? 1776. Yeah? The year is quite important. Yeah? 1776, America got independence. And you must read also, that American treaty. But by 1776, you don't think that, that slavery came to an end. So what I am trying to also talk about is, that at one point of time, Europe was a very powerful regime throughout the world. It is only, that maybe the last colony that got independence, that was South Africa, no? As late as maybe, the 20th century. So, beginning from maybe, that very early, that maybe you can go back to medieval time, to modern times, that Europe was one of the most powerful nations to rule the entire world. And that's why that when we talk about empire rights back in terms of that the post-colonial theory, we will also try to evaluate the way the writers could imagine about not only independence and freedom, but also the language. That because whenever and wherever British went, they also introduced English language. I'm sure that students know about when was English introduced in India? Any idea? No, these are some of the common things, simple things. English was introduced in India when? Anyone? No idea? 1835. Yeah? And you have to read maybe Macaulay. T.B. Macaulay. I always, that ask my student to remember T.B. Macaulay. Thomas Babington Macaulay. He has written what is called Macaulay Minutes. Every library will have, that Macaulay Minutes, how he justifies British government. British meaning, that he was asked to come to British Parliament to defend his position why English to be introduced in India. Yeah? And before that, of course, we had, that Arabic and Persian. No? These are two languages India was having. Anyway, so we'll come back to India, that later. But what I want to tell you is that at one point of time, that Europe, particularly Britain, that was a very powerful nation to dominate all over the world. And that's why, that when we talk about, that independence and then, that the idea of justice, freedom, all these things, that will complicate the matter. When particularly, that we talk about the creative writing, because one is history, of course, the historical process in which every nation tried to get freedom. With lots of struggle, it is gruesome, that maybe, that efforts by all the people of the country. But another thing is the literary representation, no? The idea of literature. And we must try also to understand about, that how literature becomes a very important document to enter into the domain of, the history. So in my talk, that what I'll be trying to do is, one is, that talking about the history of, that a nation or, that a country. Another is language. Will try to take little maybe, that issue. And the third, of course, is culture. Let's, that try to deal with these three. Now, having all these things, that we have to also understand about the way literary critics, that I will quote maybe 2 or 3 famous literary critics. There are too many actually. But primarily, if you understand, if you want to understand about the post-colonial writing, particularly literary writing, the name that you come to know about, that the critics, particularly the theorists, one is Bugewatigo, Decolonizing Mind. You must read, meaning there is an essay prescribed. I'm sure you know that. So the entire book is very important to understand about Bugewatigo, Decolonizing Mind, whereby he talks about basically 2 things. One is the language of the African, that people, whereby that language is not just for communication. What does he talk about? Language is for also that preserving and expanding the idea of culture. So language is not just for communication. It is also to document culture. Without language, we cannot document culture. And if we don't document culture, of course, it will vanish. like that the idea of folklore. No, folklore is to be documented, otherwise it will die. The second thing, the second author is of course Frank Hanna, The Wretched of the Earth and the that Black Skin, White Mask. No, these are some of the books that you need to read, so that we understand some of the textual that references to the idea of post-colonialism. And in Indian context, we have many, but we have also number 6, that decolonizing Indian mind. How does that Indian at least that the idea of Indian is that we are totally free country, but then we are yet to be that's politically yes free, but what about cultural subjugation? So these are the 3 authors that you need to read perhaps to understand about the textual references to that whether Chinua Achebe or maybe Boogie's play or short story and the the other thing that you have. Let's try to take one by one. That I'll also talk about history. Say that while talking about history, let's take the text called Chinua Achebe's Think Policy. I just give you that after you understand about the idea of the empire. Empire's idea is to that one is the idea of introducing new economy. Wherever that the empire went, they introduced new economy. So that when you read say Chinua Achebe's Think Policy, I'm just giving you one example. That earlier it was barter system. No, barter system. No? Barter system, then cash economy was introduced. So now money became that way to transact business. So whenever you read about post-colonialism, we also must try to understand about how the empire is always that the bigger business that establishment called capitalism. Without capitalism, there is no way that you can think about the empire. So when Karl Marx writes about the the Das Kapital or the Capital and Communist Manifesto, and particularly that when you read Decolonizing Mind, what Ruggie talks about, say there are many industries now set up in Africa, say Nigeria or maybe Kenya or any part of. One logic is that industries are meant to bring development into the country they establish. No, that is what the logic is. But Ruggie asks about whose children are going to be benefited. One that has big industry. I'm sure that some of those who have read Decolonizing Mind will get a reference there. So the capitalism, as we all know, and Karl Marx has already that theorized it, that there are 2 different kind of classes, rich and the poor, and the workers will always try to work hard, sometimes more than maybe that 10 or 12 hours, and the profit will always go to the capital. And there is a reference I remember, that in Ruggie that once the worker is, that say either he lost his hand or leg, or maybe that he was burnt maybe in a factory, then he becomes useless. And what about that security of the children? No education, no that proper say family health need, etc., etc. So these are some of the things that we understand, that when Chinua Achebe writes about Igbo society, Nigeria, in 1958 the text got published, and Chinua Achebe writes about a community which is basically egalitarian. Of course, that he talks all about male, female, there is gender, the differences. Women are considered to be always, that under the domination of their husband, etc. But through folk tales, folklore, and African, that idioms, what Chinua Achebe talks about in Think Policy is, that he talks about two things. Basically, that majorly how British came and that divided the entire Igbo community. So there is new economy, there is new education. English education was introduced, so that there are also that children like Chinua Achebe were going out to English schools. There is also new religion. Christianity has been introduced. So there is conversion. But what is most important is that look at the character of Okonkwo. Okonkwo is considered to be the hero of the community. But if you read the entire novel, the last part, if you remember about, there is also a reference to what is called, the district commissioner. And the role of district commissioner is very important because that what he talks about, that in the text, he would like to write a novel about the people of Lower Nigeria. And how much he is going to devote to maybe that because Okonkwo is now dead, no? He committed suicide because he cannot imagine that his community will not support him in order to drive the enemy from his country. And that's why he commits suicide because the humiliation and kind of that. So if you understand about this reference to the district commissioner, the district commissioner says that he will devote not more than a paragraph, no, one paragraph about Okonkwo, who was the hero of the community. What does it mean? That according to Chinua Achebe, Okonkwo is the hero of the entire novel. The entire novel is about Okonkwo. Whereas for district commissioner, that Okonkwo is a non-entity. That happens throughout the world. The British, who are basically white, the white, the ruler, they consider everyone other than white as low. And that's why the idea of that Africa was considered to be a dark country. Dark is a metaphor, of course, as we all know, as it goes in English literature. And dark symbolizes, that uncultured, uncivilized. And that's why the British, they knew themselves to be the master of, the universe. We have come to teach, that they ruled, they ruled as, that someone inferior. And that's why they have taken, that task, and they have come as, meaning they have come for a civilizing mission, civilizing the country. So I think, that while reading Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, we immediately get a reference to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. So the first thing that I'm not going to narrate everything, but in the context of the Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, one thing that we realize that Joseph Conrad wrote this novel with an idea of a liberal humanist, that writer. No, because if you have read Heart of Darkness, immediately you come to realize that there is some reference to liberal humanism in Conrad's, that Heart of Darkness. But the question that comes to our mind, meaning I always think about, that the first and foremost thing that we need to perhaps understand about, whose heart is dark? The idea of dark. This is the question that I am leaving to all of you. So, that in African context, whether you read Chinua Achebe from Nigeria and look at that the other novels that people wrote about, or Chinua Achebe, things, apart from Things Fall Apart, of course, he has written too many novels. Bukuyi Watingo, for example, was from Kenya. So whether it is Nigeria, Kenya, there is also a dialogue between Chinua Achebe and Bukuyi Watingo. For example, the idea of language. Which language one has to write? If you know about Bukit Batiko at one point of time was writing in English, but from 1972 onwards, you know that he realized that it is better that he could write only in his mother tongue, Gikui. Yeah, and that's why you know that he tried to have a dialogue with Chinua Achebe by saying that how English, the language of the ruler or the empire, is not fit to express oneself, because then you are also talking about cultural subjugation. No? And that's why, you know, that I just mentioned here that a language that we, you know, that say, speak about in Indian context. Say, let's come to India. In India, we know that British came for a, you know, that they came for a business purpose through East India Company. We know that, you know, that the east of India, 1600, but then from 1757, after Battle of Plassey, hope you know about, another 100 years they tried to dominate, but then from 1857, what they did, 1857 onwards, they started three universities, hope you know, in 1857. Not Delhi University. Delhi University was established in 1920, 22. But before that, you know, the English was introduced in India, 1835, as I said. And 1857, they established three universities: University of Madras, Calcutta, and Bombay. Now, you know that if you try to understand about India's, you know that freedom struggle and how, you know that beginning from 1885, you know that particularly 1885, there was a very concerted effort made by political party like Congress, and then Gandhi came, and then of course you know that you have too many leaders. India took maybe, you know, that another 100 years to fight. You know? And there are fascinating novels like Raja Rao Kantapura, for example, you know, where he talks about how Gandhian, you know, that struggle, Gandhian movement was received in South Indian villages. And there are too many, of course, you know, that I will, you know, that maybe partially refer to some of the things. But what is very important about, you know, that when we got independence in 1947, people say, and I'm just making certain statements, that India did not get independence. It was given. It was given. You know that. Think about had you know that say the situation of British change, India would not have got independence in 1947. Of course, you know that you might have you know that also read in other you know that context that India would have got independence earlier. No, all these you know that opinions are there. But look at you know that what happened is more than 200 years of empire, and then 1947 we got political independence, as I said. But political independence was also resulted in partition. Yeah, and that's why we have to you know that understand about the way partition study now, because you know that think about you know that more than 2 million people were butchered, and women were raped, and you know that people lost their home, and when we talk about partition, it is not just one partition. No? There were three partitions, at least you know that I can count. One is the you know that idea of you know that Bengal got divided early 1905, no, and that made East and West Bengal. No? The second, of course, is partition, whereby many parts of Bengal, Punjab, and other parts either went to you know that Pakistan or came to India. No? And the third, of course, is Bangladesh, creation of Bangladesh, 1971. So that was another partition. So when we talk about partition, we also talk about the way we got a legacy from the you know that the idea of British you know that rule to you know that mismatch the idea of history, culture, and language, because you know that I'm just referring to Bangladesh partition because it was purely because of language. And you know that when you read Amitabh Ghosh's Shadow Lines, for example, the title particularly Shadow Lines, how can you know that you divide country by just you know that drawing a line that this is India and that is Pakistan. Now, when it comes to you know that independence, as we all know, you know that we also bother about to understand about what happened to say the minorities, no, after independence or during freedom struggle. Minorities in you know that many towns. And what happened to, for example, Adivasi Dalit, women? No, these are some of the you know that issues that we need to talk about in post-colonial context. Because race we talk about, language we talk about, but we don't talk about caste. Because in Indian context, you know that it is very important that today, as we all know, you know that Binodini's story is there, no, and Binodini in your course. So what happens to Dalit subjectivity? Someone like Binodini is writing from you know that not just you know that gender point of view, also Dalit point of view. So the intersectionality between caste, class, and gender you have to also combine. No, when you are either reading this story or you know that teaching this story. So you know that what we need to you know that understand about the post-colonialism, because there is always a kind of question, and please you know that refer to say Anya Lumba's book, Anya Lumba's edited book, Post-Colonialism, and she was the first one to bring you know that this book, particularly in Indian context, because she brought certain section, I'm sure you know that many of you have read, whereby she also included one chapter from Kancha Ileya, Why I'm Not Hindu. This is very important and interesting thing, because Kancha Ileya is known as you know that he's a Bahujan you know that activist as well as scholar. And particularly in the context of you know that India, when we talk about post-colonialism, this entry is very important. So far as Anya Lumba's post-colonialism, you know that reader is concerned, because if you read the book Why I Am Not a Hindu, Kanchele towards the end of you know that his book, you know, I mean I'll refer to two things. One is he talks about that even though India got independence in 1947, you know that look at the upper caste class, they continue to be part of British regime. No, there is a book called Babu Fiction. You must read it. You know that who are the people who got you know that English education passed in India? No, by the time British introduced English in India, the upper caste, particularly Brahmin, no. And they are also the ones who started writing about Indian subjectivity in English. So English, you know, as a language was basically, you know, that was a beneficial for the upper caste. But once we got independence, they are the same people who continue to rule. So there is one reference, you know, that in Kancha Ileya's Why I Am Not Hindu, he talks about the development that you talk about today. Beginning from maybe, you know, we have passed how many, 75 years of India's independence, and we are talking about that India is going to be developed nation, and you know that we are those still developing, you know that, and poverty ratio is, you know, that rampant and kind of thing. Kancha Ileya talks about that when we talk about development, whose development we talk about? Yeah, whose development? So he says that you know that upper caste administrator and officers, they continue to dominate, even though we are you know that a free nation. In other words, what about people's freedom? No, if we are talking about freedom of the people. The second most important thing that he talks about is he uses the word Dalitization. If India needs to be developed, then India must be Dalitized. Why he says in this context? Because you know that going back to Bukiwating is decolonizing mind, while I was talking about the idea of industry. Cultural also in a similar way talks about who are the people who, that makes road, no? Make railways, make flyovers. Who are the people who produce grain, for example? Who are the people who, that produce clothes for you? No? So, in India, it is quite irony, it is quite ironical that the producers in India are not the consumers. And it is in this context that how far we got freedom in India. No? So these are the things that Kanchayalya talks about while giving the term Dalitization. Now let's come to the last maybe that point whereby we are talking about that almost all countries world over are that free now out of maybe the clutches of the empire or that British rule or maybe white rule. But that there are also subtle references whereby there is new colonization. New colonization in the form of there are several. One is you might have heard about that how big industries, big institutions are coming to India. No, say you talk about Noida, Gurugram, that, and many others. Say students who write their exam in England, the script come to that somewhere Gurugram to be evaluated because Indian that the cost of Indian labor is very cheap. No, India is hope that recently many Indians they were making queue to go to Ukraine, Russia, to that be part of Russian army. No, hope you remember about because that we as a nation, no, 1 point maybe that 4 or 5 billion difficult to survive. So what I am talking about is you go to any part of the world, any part. After liberalization, particularly after 90s, particularly 80s, that it began in England, and I still remember Margaret Thatcher's statement, while talking about new colonization, she talked about, that of course we are free, but that she questioned about, that where is the family? That she talked about there is no community, there is no family, we are all individuals. So her statement I remember, that where is the community? We are only individuals. Yeah, this is after that 1980. Globalization came to meaning India, particularly in the form of liberalization in a big way after 90s. Hope about 1991. And after 1991, what you found, liberalization of Indian economy. There is also privatization and what we say, that globalization, privatization and liberalization, LPG we say, LPG. And with this, that what we find, there is a new culture, and then there is also, the reference made in, that post-colonial reader book, the new colonization with new slaves. New slaves are, that in the form of workers. I already talked about workers working hard, maybe sometime, the 12 to 14 hours to earn their livelihood. So, that when we talk about globalization, we also talk about, that how material resources of the world, think about India. Material resources of the world are getting distributed. All of a sudden, that in India we have 22 billionaires, no? 22 billionaires. That is after maybe, that liberalization, maybe, that for last 5 years, maybe 22 billionaires. And we also come to realize that when you talk about Indian economy, though we are thinking about how much, 5 trillion or I don't know, that's 3 trillion. Maybe that in the near future, but there is also a statistic that 80% of the Indian resources, I am talking about India, 80% of India's resources are enjoyed by 10% of the people of this country. 80%. Yeah? 80% of India's resources are enjoyed by only 10% of the population of this country. And the rest maybe that 10% is equally divided among 90%. So this is new slavery. Yeah? Because that if you talk in terms of meaning, I don't want to give statistics here, but that if you want to understand about the idea of inequality, after independence, perhaps that we are heading for a day or maybe that time whereby there will be utmost difficult that time for the people to get resources. Yeah. So that, and this is world over. I'm not telling that this is one case. India is a case, and that's why that what people are now talking about. America is the world police. No, these are some of the things that we must remember. So America, that's why dollar dream, and dollar is dictating. And the term that I use, McDonaldization and Coca-Colaization, these are some of the new cultural expression in which our life is being, set up. So America is now, instead of Britain, America is now the world, ruler. And that's why dollar is very important, finally, that to conclude my talk, that what we need to know about is, as I said, that there are several, the complexities understanding the term post-colonialism. I did not touch upon, say the idea of racial, for example, ethnicity, religion. No, I only talk minimal, that I talk about history, language, because when we talk about, say, English language in India, it is called, what Salman Rushdie talks about, the chuttified language. In African context, there is also, that a term, that how African language and English language make pidgin, that language. So there are lots and lots of issues, but what I want to tell you is that post-colonialism as a theory, or as an idea, or as a concept, that is evolving over the years. That politically, yes, we are independent, and there is not a single country in the world who is under the empire now. Every country is free, but the way new slavery is coming with new colonizing, factors, be in terms of maybe language, culture, religion. Perhaps that literature we have to read more and more in order to understand about the way new, that colonization is trying to dominate us. And of course, the two things I wanted to, tell you before I finish. So liberalization, when I talk about, or globalization, that one interesting thing is that now, that we can also always showcase our culture. For example, that when we are talking about new colonization, say India's culture could also, that display at any part of the world. So that is, that there are forums, right? Facebook and all others. So cultural exchange, which was earlier not possible for all of us. Whether, say, Indian food now is, that very popular, like chicken tikka, that you go to, or maybe biryani, no? The most famous, perhaps, the food item, or even Bombay samosa, no? Italy, meaning though we know that all of us, we love what is called pizza, burger, and maybe, that other things, but our food is also, meaning foods are also going to abroad and maybe, that getting. So that is one thing, that what we are talking also about, globalization and liberalization have helped us also to showcase our, that cultural talent. Another second thing, that, and this is the last, that thanks for globalization, that whenever and wherever there is violation of human rights, we can always mobilize opinions to resist against the kind of inhuman rights. So there is also cross current. What I am talking about is that these are discourse and counter discourse. So liberalization, globalization could be good, also bad, and that's why that creative writers, many of that creative writers are trying to document things, and that's why that we know that post-colonialism is a process. It is not a finish end, that, and I'm sure that as we go on and on, even bookish that book or maybe Chinua Achebe's book could be read in a new way, not just that through the empire, but also say new cultural expression, linguistic, religious, economy, etc., etc. So thank you so much giving me an opportunity to talk to you. We can actually that if there are questions, I will be able to answer that any number of questions if you have. Thank you.